Hello, and a warm welcome to this ICAS On Demand webinar. I'm Chris Campbell, Head of Tax for Tax Practice and Owner Managed Business Taxes at ICAS, and I'm pleased to be hosting this webinar. Research and development tax relief is an area of growing interest to our members, supporting companies carrying out innovation. The additional tax relief can, in some cases, make the difference between a project being commercially viable or not. So getting the tax relief correct is really important. R&D can present challenges to our members, many of whom have expressed concerns about the activities of some R&D claims, so-called specialists, who offer to make R&D claims for clients. In some cases, where it does not appear that R&D within the meaning of the legislation is taking place. Some of these advisors pursue aggressive claims, often with fees based on the percentage of the claim. R&D is also an area where there is increased HMRC compliance activity at present, in some cases resulting in interest charges and penalties when a claim is inaccurate or not in compliance with the rules. To help you navigate those challenges, I'm pleased to be joined by Justine Dignam, Director of Tax Incentives and Reliefs at Markel Tax. Justine has been with Markel since 2014 and has been responsible for leading the strategy and development of introducing tax incentives and reliefs to accountancy partners. Previously, Justine has worked within the professional service and accountancy sectors in senior positions for many years. So this means that she has an understanding of the issues you may be facing when having discussions with your clients about R&D. Justine, I'm very pleased to welcome you on this ICAS On Demand webinar, and without further ado, it's over to you.
Thank you, Chris. And it's great to be here today. So, as Chris said, my name is Justine Dignam. I'm Director of Tax Incentives and Reliefs at Markel Tax. Just to give you by way of a little bit of background about what we do, so Markel Tax specialise in incentives and reliefs. We don't offer wider tax services and we don't compete with accountancy firms. We don't target clients directly. We work through accountancy partners and referral partners because we believe that this is the best course of action and way to work with end clients. As a trusted business advisor and accountant, you know their business affairs better than we ever would. And it's really important that when people are considering making submissions and making looking at tax opportunities, that the wider tax consideration is made. So that's what we're going to look at today. So today, I just want to focus on a little bit about why R&D credits are so vital, today's challenging landscape, which I don't think will come as a surprise to anybody. I think we've seen a lot of activity, certainly over recent months, and we've seen a little bit of flip-flopping around the legislation. And we're also going to look at spotting some of the risks as well. And I hope you'll find this informative. I do apologise if some of this is information that you do already know and are comfortable with, but hopefully we won't bore you too much if we go through some of that. So when we're looking at the R&D, so what are R&D tax credits? It keeps the UK at the top of global innovation. It's a scheme that's there to reward businesses for innovation. The benefits have changed slightly, and we'll look at those, but the tax benefit is up to now 26.97%, and that's for R&D intensive companies. But the benefit has reduced quite a lot across the other areas of loss-making businesses. And it can offer a real vital source of cash flow to your clients. So I really hope that people don't get scared off making R&D submissions because of all the headlines that are going to hit and are already hitting about the HMRC activity, because it really is a fantastic tax relief that benefits businesses who are investing in innovation. And I think, you know, businesses having gone through COVID, Brexit, it's really important that businesses are rewarded for incentives such as R&D tax relief. So moving on. So why is the landscape changing so dramatically? Well, the first cause, of course, is, as Chris alluded to there, it's an unregulated market. So over the last 3 to 5 years, we've seen a huge amount of R&D tax businesses surfacing, you know, from small offices suddenly becoming multi-million-pound businesses. You know, it seems to be that everybody is setting up an R&D business. And unfortunately, they can, because it's an unregulated market. So there is no regulation around setting up an R&D business. The second reason why it's got to change is because there's been a policing problem. So these claims have been a free flow effectively into the revenue, and they haven't been policed. So we very, very rarely, up until the last 12 months, had an R&D inquiry. We would go, possibly years without having an inquiry. They were so few and far between. That's all changing now, which is great. But I think it's a shame that the state of the market had to get so bad before we've started to have this governance. Because in reality, what that will mean, and has meant, is that the masses will be penalised because of the few, and the level of abuse and fraud that's been undertaken within that sector has caused a reduction in the benefit across the business, which is a shame because it's actually aimed at the people who are actually doing the innovation. So that's really caused some problems, I think, in the sector. In terms of how that began, the cracks in the wall, if you like, we saw a case in 2018, a £29 million fraud case. We've seen arrests, we've seen people being sent to prison. These are still few and far between, where the mass of fraud or error, if you like, is generally across the sector. The government estimated that in the 21-22 period that the R&D cost in error and fraud to the taxpayer was 469 million, which is a significant amount of money, as you can see. So that's caused a turn in the legislation. There's new changes that were brought in 20. There's forthcoming changes that have been brought in from the 1st of April. There's more in August, and there's more to come in 24 and beyond. So we've seen a big increase in HMRC inspectors dedicated to the R&D division. They now report to have 245 dedicated R&D specialists, which is great. And I think that's really good in terms of putting some rigour around the enforcement of the legislation. But what that has meant is that we are seeing a huge upturn in the levels of inquiries that are coming through to start policing that. In terms of legislative changes, so we've seen in 2020, the PAYE cap was brought in for accounting periods starting after the 1st of April 21, which meant that loss-making SMEs can claim up to a limit of £20,000 plus 3 times their payroll and NI. And then in 23, we've also seen some different changes coming through. So from the 1st of August this year, it will be a requirement to submit a technical report, which is good. We think that's really important. We've always submitted technical reports just for good audit trail and to ensure that in the event of an inquiry, we have all the backing papers. It's really important that you're able to validate the claim. There is going to be the exclusion of overseas R&D spend. That's now been delayed until the 1st of April 2024. And there's also an additional tax relief for R&D intensive SMEs who have 40% of annual expenditure, over 40%, and that's now been increased slightly. An interesting one that has been brought through from the revenue is the enhanced accountability with designated names for R&D tax advisors, accountants and claimants on the R&D application. I think this is very important and has given a lot of accountants that we're talking to real food for thought in terms of, well, what does that actually mean? I think our interpretation of that is that often accountants will have clients who aren't involving them in the R&D claim. The claimant company is simply engaging with a third-party provider and then providing some numbers for the accountant to put in the CT600. The accountant has no visibility of the report, if indeed there is a report, and anything that's going in front of the revenue. We disagree with this practice, and we've always had the view that it's really important that we work with the accountant, and that the accountant is comfortable that the work that we're undertaking, the costs that we're putting in, and the activity that's been undertaken by the client is explained to the accountant, and that the accountant is comfortable with both the business practice and the financial costings that we are submitting with the accountant. So I think that's really important. the accountant is involved in the claim. It's also good that the R&D tax advisors are named, because what we are seeing in all of the inquiries that are coming through is the revenue will always ask who's had sight of this document, who's written the document or who's contributed to the document, how have you validated the information, what challenges were made, etc., etc. So I think that this is a good starting point. In terms of updating the legislation was quite behind in terms of looking at tech. So there now is an allowance for inclusion of data and cloud hosting costs, and the inclusion of pure mathematics as eligible R&D activity. And obviously, as we've heard, the rates have changed as well. So we can look at those. Also, what I'd like to just look at now is the changes to the legislation for 23-24. So as you'll see, there's been quite a significant change in the percentage terms for the rate changes. I'm not going to go through these line by line, but you'll have this in the deck now so that you can look at these. And of course, if you've got any questions, please do feel free to pick up the phone on these. In terms of what we're seeing from HMRC, the changes in claims, in inquiries have shot up. So we're now seeing across our business and across the wider Markel Tax insurance business, which allows us to have primary data, a 900% increase in inquiry rates from 2019. So that's really significant. We are under the belief from the revenue, and we are also being able to validate that by our own experiences, that 1 in 50 claims are now being inquired into by the revenue, which again is a huge upturn from probably 1 in 600 previously. As to reiterate, the cost of error and fraud to the UK taxpayer is estimated at 469 million from the revenue. So there's certainly some costs that they will want to recover. And again, the 245 dedicated R&D inspectors that are now specialising in the R&D division. What you will always find on a HMRC inquiry into R&D is a challenge on the technical report. It's very rare that the revenue will challenge the cost schedule. It will be all around the technical report. If that technical report has been written by the client, that's really hard for an accountant to validate that, because it's, a little bit like, if suddenly the report is about a software claim, for example, it's very difficult for an accountant to validate whether that is true R&D that's been taken place, or whether it's just commerciality of a new product process, or something that's business as usual out there in the marketplace, something that's readily available. And that poses obviously high reputational risk for the accountant's involvement in that, and also for the client, who's putting those any spurious claims, shall we say, or any exaggerated claims in front of the revenue, because there's repercussions with that. And this gap is demonstrated here, because what we will always try and do within our business and with our team is we have a real blend of technical expertise. So we have software engineers, scientists, technicians, technologists. We have financially qualified people, CTA, ATT, ACA qualified, and ex-HMRC inspectors. And that allows us to blend all those specialisms in to create a knowledge bank and expertise that we feel offers a robust offering to clients looking to do an R&D submission. What we will always do is challenge the technical merits of the scheme and really delve into what the competitive landscape is like out there, what's the technical advance that's been sought, what were the uncertainties that were looking to be overcome, and how have they been overcome, if indeed they have been and not been aborted. And of course, we all know that if the technical uncertainties are unable to be overcome, then we can still claim for a project if it's aborted at that stage. And I think the other thing on that is quite simply that within a firm of accountants, it's likely that actually most firms are not going to want to go out and employ a team of scientists and specialists and engineers. So it leaves a real gap for an accountant if they are looking to do R&D claims, how they're going to validate these technical reports and indeed compile the technical reports in a format that will be acceptable to the revenue if the report is scrutinised. So it's just how we look at being able to do that. And this slide really just demonstrates our capabilities in terms of the team's backgrounds and specialised areas of expertise. I think what I wanted to do here as well was just to run through a couple of slides that just very quickly looks around where we see common errors across the R&D reports that we see. And quite often the client's focusing on the commercial description of the project instead of following the principles outlined in the legislation. So a client, of course, is very excited about launching these new products or processes. So they'll talk about the commercialisation of that. And of course, that isn't what the revenue is looking for. The revenue will always look at the technological baseline. What was the starting point? What were the technicalities that had to be overcome? How was a competent professional unable to resolve the issue? And actually, what is the competency level of the competent professionals within the team? They'll want details on those as well to be able to substantiate that indeed if the client went to market, they would be unable to resolve that in the general marketplace. And of course, of the project boundaries being established. What we also see in a lot of R&D claims is really wordy and repetitive text. We also see where a lot of R&D providers will just copy the code and put that in as a bulk of the submission. Well, of course, the revenue are very familiar with the legislation, so don't need to be overly reminded of that. What they're interested in is actually the technical merits of this submission. So it's really important that that's focused on when looking to do an R&D submission. And just a little bit of background about Markel. In terms of, we partner with 2,500 accountancy firms. We provide the Tolly's tax advice line and engage with over 750,000 SMEs across our insurance and tax business throughout the UK, and help 55,000 accountants. Many of you hopefully will use the helplines across the UK, and winners of the Best Independent Tax Consultancy Firm of the Year in 2020. And that's me, Chris.
Excellent. Well, Justine, thank you for joining us and giving us such a comprehensive overview there about R&D and some of the issues that our members need to think about when supporting their clients on this. You mentioned quite a bit about the technical report and the importance of that. And is that something that you've seen when you're talking to others in the sector, that where claims for R&D have maybe been failed, that maybe lack of the technical report is maybe something that may be partly behind the cause of it?
Yeah, I mean, I would say probably 100% of every query that comes through us, it's a failing in the technical report. So we're seeing a number of accountants who are insured with us and some who aren't insured with us on the fee protection insurance that are coming through to us now, where they may well, I think what we're seeing now with the HMRC inquiries is, historically, roll back 2 years, even probably a year, we would see inquiries come through from the revenue with 2 or 3 questions, and we were able to answer those quite quickly and resolve those quite quickly. What we're seeing now from the revenue is, there might be 6 questions in the first inquiry letter, which then turns into 36 when we've done a couple of rounds. So it's by no means an easy. The inquiries are quite aggressive that we're seeing at the moment. They're wanting to get to the bottom. So it's always focused on the technical report. We're seeing pretty much, as I say, all of the inquiries coming through. What tends to happen, or what has been happening, is if the accountant has been involved with the technical report and submission, we'll see probably the first round of inquiries being dealt with by the accountant. But then once the revenue are really kind of tuning into this and then starting to send very lengthy questions requiring responses, quite often the accountant will reach out to us at that point to say, look, I think it would be good to get some involvement from somebody from a technical capability. And I think that's right. As I say, if it's a claim for something like software, the revenue do have software engineers, so you really do need somebody with that level of expertise to be able to come and validate and stand by the client side to be able to make sure that that the revenue are challenged, because the revenue aren't always right, of course. So it may be an area that they aren't strong on. They've got 250 inspectors that won't necessarily have specialisms across every possible sector. So, we do challenge the revenue where appropriate. And it's about us helping the revenue to understand the true R&D activity that's been undertaken. The primary objectives for us is to make sure it's the right people are claiming the right kind of expenditure for the right kind of activity. And that's really important, because in the event of an inquiry, typically inquiries can last 12 to 18 months. They're very costly. There will be fines and penalties that can be incurred. So it's important that we head it off at the pass. And if an inquiry comes in, we're as helpful as possible. We give as much detail as possible. We put a technical person on that defence to make sure that we're providing the right kind of information to the revenue that will make it clear to them that if there is R&D qualifying expenditure, that we can validate it and the project scope. So in answer to that, yes, it's always about the technical report, Chris, and it's really important that people don't try and fudge their way through it, because it's important for the client to kind of, if they do need to withdraw the claim, that they withdraw it as quickly and effectively as possible without incurring fines and penalties.
Excellent. No, thank you, Justine, for that. We've had quite a bit of contact from members about being their clients approaching them sometimes at the last minute with a claim that they maybe don't feel comfortable with. What would your advice be to an ICAS member who maybe doesn't have the in-house technical team that you mentioned earlier, in terms of reassuring their client that just because an external, possibly cold caller, has identified potential relief, that they shouldn't feel uncomfortable about challenging that into their reputation, etc.
Absolutely. And we see this daily. So we get calls from accountants every day that say, that very same story. Their clients have been approached by somebody, they've been told they can claim £50,000 for a care plan. They run a care home, and because Dorothy has 5 tablets in the evening and Fred has 3 in the morning, they can claim £50,000 because they're all on care plans, and that's R&D. Well, we all know that that's not R&D. So, and we are more than happy to have conversations with clients to explain why something doesn't qualify. I would say we turn away 9 out of 10 potential claims that come through to us, that we have a conversation with the client, we explain to them why it doesn't qualify. We warn them of not submitting a claim if they're cold called. It's really important that they speak with their accountant. They're the trusted advisor. They can help them. And as I say, we speak to them. If they do qualify, then we can assist them. If they don't qualify, we don't mind having that 10-15 minute conversation with clients just to reassure them that they shouldn't make a claim, the reason why they shouldn't make a claim, and we can document that for the accountant to make sure that they've got that for their audit trail. I think quite often what's happened with the R&D is, they've got a claimant company will have a friend and they go down the pub and they say they've had this great claim and they've got £50,000 back and it's so exciting, and they're in the same sector, so they should think of doing that. And it's just really snowballed out of control. And we see, because we only deal with accountants, we tend to pick up trends quite quickly, because we'll get calls from a number of accountants who've been targeted, who their clients have been targeted by certain firms. And we see things like where they're targeting construction clients, care homes, and it's not to say that a care home wouldn't have an R&D claim if they've done some significant investment in software, for example, but just simply having different care plans for one patient having a certain amount of medication on one day and another one having another, that certainly isn't R&D. So I think that my message would be seek advice quickly, and please don't feel that that as an accountant you should know all the answers. That's why we're here. As I say, there's a team of 30 that just specialise in that very niche area, and we're always happy to have a call with you or a client just to kind of give you some certainty around whether it is a valid claim or not.
Thanks, Justine. You mentioned as well about the changes that were coming in August this year in terms of the obviously for people that were doing a technical report anyway, that shouldn't necessarily phase them. I mean, do you see that having an impact on genuine R&D claims and their ability to get relief? Do you think that'll put people off, or do you think if those genuine claims don't have anything to fear by it?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, genuine claims have nothing to fear. Let's get some certainty around that. The R&D scheme, we hope, is here to stay. Although there's been some changes in the legislation in terms of the value of the claims, there is talk now that the SME scheme and the RDEC scheme are going to be merged. I think that probably will happen to simplify matters. I think there's been a significant drop for SME loss-making companies. The drop down is 44% of the benefit now available. So there has been a kind of drop in the tax benefit. I hope there isn't an intention to get rid of the R&D, the scheme, because it really does benefit people who are bringing innovation. And I think if it's a genuine R&D claim, there is nothing to fear. The revenue wants, are supportive of that, as are the government. And, you'll hear in all the financial speeches and the budgets, etc., there is always a commitment to R&D and a commitment to bringing innovation and retaining innovation in the UK. And I think the danger is where a client writes their own R&D submission in terms of the technical report, and we're seeing this a lot, is where they're not used to writing a technical report for the revenue. They might be used to writing a technical report to gain investment, but that's two very different things. So quite often we can help clients where they have got true R&D projects that have been undertaken. We can help them to craft that report and tell the story in a way that's suitable for the revenue and that will also withstand scrutiny from the revenue. What we also do is, in the event of an inquiry, we will defend any of our claims without any further fees, because if the claim isn't valid, we won't submit. We don't charge the client. We explain why it doesn't qualify, and we both walk away from that.
Thanks very much, Justine. I won't subject you to any more interrogation from me. It's been really interesting to hear about all the different areas of R&D and how the issues that our members need to be thinking about when working with their clients. Please remember that you can keep up to date with all the latest tax and other professional news, including the latest information, guidance and resources on icas.com. You can access technical support through the ICAS Technical Help Desk, available through the Contact Us section of the website. This covers audit and accounting, tax, practice support, AML and ethics. It only leaves me to once again to thank you, Justine, for delivering your presentation today. And of course, you, the audience, for watching this ICAS On Demand webinar. I do hope that you've found the content helpful and look forward to welcoming you to another webinar soon.
Thank you.